I'm a tour bus driver, and I've driven buses for many artists and bands throughout my past 20 plus years of life. You go through a lot of crazy stuff when you're out on the road with bands and artists that party. However, even through all the craziness I've ever encountered, nothing will ever top what I saw when I first started doing tour bus driving in the late 90s. We were somewhere in the Midwest at this little hole-in-the-wall venue. I don't remember the exact name, and because it's been so long and has probably changed, I just remember the venue, and it had a big parking lot which was out back. I remember the building was painted black and had green trim all along the doorways. Beyond that was a road, and then beyond that was a forest. I'm not sure how long the forest went on for, or if maybe it was private property, or government-owned land that was undeveloped, or whatever. I never paid attention to it though, and I just did my usual job duties. For those who are not familiar with tour bus driving, much of it is driving the artist or band to the next venue, going to go check yourself into a hotel, and sleeping until it's time to hit the road to the next city. I remember on this particular night, I hadn't really felt like sleeping, so I was just outside the bus smoking a cigarette, facing the forest. It was definitely later on at night, like 8 or 9 p.m. At this time of the year, it was dark out, so there were streetlights, but there wasn't a whole lot of traffic, if really any traffic at all, behind the venue. The parking lot had a few cars in it, but mainly from the venue staff. The band I was touring around at the time was in the venue, either about to play or currently playing, so I was just enjoying some quiet time outside. I remember noticing what I thought were lights in the forest, but I realized it was actually just the reflection of eyes against the streetlights. There was a streetlight across the street from where I was smoking a cigarette, so this eye shine started to appear closer to the street. Whatever animal this was coming out towards the streetlight. I was a little startled at first, but quickly just thought it was a deer. It was pretty large, and so maybe it definitely was not a deer. I drive a bus for a living, and I'm not a woodsman by any stretch of the means. But I'm pretty sure this was not a deer. I got a little closer, and even though this animal was slightly outside of my view of the streetlight, there is enough ambient light to give me details of what it looked like. As I started to be able to make out the silhouette and shape of this thing, I noticed it looked to be like a huge shaggy dog. Not just any shaggy dog, like a wolf. It was staring at me. I could begin to see more of the shape and detail of the muzzle, and the ears and the head. This was the largest dog I've ever seen in my life, and it kind of freaked me out. It was slowly getting closer and closer, but just enough to stay out of the streetlight and still be able to watch me. This went on for a few moments, and it never fully came into the light enough for me to make full detail of it. Just enough of what I saw. That was more than enough for me, so I put my cigarette out and began walking to the venue, and I hung out in there for the rest of the night. By the time we ended up getting back on the tour bus later on that night, I didn't even bother looking over to see if that thing was still there, nor did I even want to. I just wanted to get to the next town and leave it be. That's my story, and that's pretty much the only thing I've ever experienced in my entire life that was unexplainable. Hello, what lurks beneath? I'm writing you back, filling you in, and updating you on the things that have been happening. Just recently, I sent you my experiences with what was going on at the ranch I'm working at. I told you how I'm a ranch exterminator, and how we've been having issues with these giant wolf creatures coming into the ranch and killing livestock. Well, last I told you, I came face to face with the big alpha male who stole a pig out of the pen and also killed a goat. Well, I also told you the next morning I got up to find a lot of the other animals dead and attacked. After the ranch owner put in a special phone call, since he's good friends with some of the higher ups on the force, that he was having some larger animals continuously killing his livestock, and he needed help. We didn't hear anything at all, except the following day. After that, 3 black Hummers show up to the property. Out from each of these vehicles steps a man in a black suit, and these men look like they're from the Secret Service. There was also at least 8 to 10 Special Force soldiers with them, with weaponry I didn't even recognize, and special badges and uniforms. They told us to get into the house and to stay there until further notice. At this point, we're freaking out because something is definitely going on. Me and the owner go and stay in the house while we can only assume that these people are here to deal with our issue. We were in the house most of the day that I remember, and finally, sometime in the evening, we get a knock on the front door. It was one of the men we talked to earlier who looks like he's from the Secret Service. He told us that the threat has been taken care of and that they're going to be closely monitoring our activities in this area. He then told us that we're not allowed to leave the ranch for any reason for the time being, and we're not allowed to talk to anybody about what we've experienced and what we saw. So, I'm writing this to you in confidentiality. They also told me that they would have their men patrolling the perimeter for the next while to ensure the threat is gone. Clearly, somebody knows something about what's going on, and they're not telling us anything. Are these things government created? At this point, I'm not sure what to be more scared of. These wolves, or the fact Big Brother knows about them and has sent a special task force to deal with the issue with their own proprietary weaponry. I need to find a way to get out of here before I get too entangled into this myself. Wish me luck. I'm here to tell you a story that my father has told me and has not wanted me to share with anybody until after his passing. Well, my dad passed away back in 2013, and I feel like it would be good if people know what he had to say. I know some people might not believe him, but he has been keeping this on him for a while and was never able to talk about it. He wanted to wait till after he passed so his life wouldn't be in jeopardy. My father was a part of a special military branch. He would never tell me the name, but he told me that they executed special missions. One mission that him and his small crew of 5 other agents were tasked to take down a pack of extremely aggressive wolf creatures in Oklahoma. Apparently, the same creatures had killed 2 people, several livestock, and were causing a bunch of havoc. My father told me that at first, he didn't think it was real, and that they were playing a joke on him. The military knows these things exist, and they even have a special name, which he never repeated to me. They're not referred to, though, as werewolves or dogmen, as we know them. I can never get a direct answer from him, but I believe from what he's told me that they are a direct result of the military's doing in some way or another. Him and his team were sent out to Oklahoma. There is a discreet remote location that they were dropped off at that led right to the woods that they needed to be in. He told me it took them less than 24 hours to track these beasts, and he said it took a lot of ammo and the right weapons, but eventually they got the whole pack down. It took 5 days, and they lost 2 agents in the mission. He went on to tell me that these creatures were brutal and savage, and he almost lost his hand to having it almost bitten off entirely. He's had scars on his body and his back growing up my entire life, and told me he got those scars from this mission, and he had never told me what they were from before. He was physically attacked and almost torn wide open when his partner shot this thing off my father with a .50 caliber rifle. He explained to me that killing these things was no easy feat. They don't die easily, and they could take a lot of punishment. He says they weren't animals they were dealing with. These are super beings. They were more intelligent than we could have ever imagined, and were outsmarted on several occasions when we tried to trap them and strategize. He said that after 5 days, and they had completed the mission, they had to rid the bodies, and he never explained to me how they did that. He said after they were picked up from the mission, they were told specifically about this mission that they can never reveal any details or else their lives would be in jeopardy. This happened back in the 90s, and so I didn't really find out about a lot of these details until close to him passing. Even then, he still wouldn't tell me everything there is to know, and I wonder why to this day he carried so much of that information to the grave with him. However, he did reveal an interesting fact. Out where he was, in the area that he was hunting these beasts in Oklahoma, there were Indian burial mounds all throughout. What him and his crew discovered is that inside these mounds were what he described as staircases that led down a really long ways. He told me that he believed that whatever these things were guarding these mounds for a reason, and that they were coming in and out of these mounds from underneath the earth. Now, of course, this is just his findings, and what he relayed to me, so I believe him. This was back in 1988, and the fall, so I would say roughly October. I was giving a friend a ride back to his house. Now, this friend's car had broken down about a month prior, so he would pay me in gas, and I would kind of help him give him rides around when he really needed it. I never minded. This was a good family friend of mine, so I didn't want to leave him hanging. He happens to work night shift, or swing shift, I guess, so I was driving him back to work at 2 in the morning. I stay up pretty late anyway, so I don't mind the drive, and I had nothing better to do. My friend doesn't necessarily live out in the middle of nowhere, but it is a little bit more rural than it is a suburbia. It's quite a ways out of a drive from my place to his, and well, that doesn't include his work. He does warehouse work, so his job is a little closer to town. Luckily, the traffic is pretty dead on the way home, since, like I said, it's a little bit more out there, and no one's really on the road at 2 o'clock past in the morning. Everything was going pretty smooth this night. Well, we were driving back to his place, just like normal, I should say. As we were pulling up his driveway, though, my headlights showed some sort of animal looking through his windows. We were both perplexed at what we were looking at. His driveway is roughly 50 feet long, so as we're looking at it, we just see this dog standing on 2 legs, looking through his windows. It looked over at us and snarled. It was humongous. It looked like a giant gray wolf standing on 2 legs. It had huge fangs and teeth that stuck out of its mouth. After it snarled, it took off into the woods a ways behind his house and disappeared from us entirely. Me and my friend were so shocked, I hadn't even fully pulled into his house yet. I think I just let go of the gas entirely because I was so startled by seeing this thing. It scared the shit out of me and my friend though. We didn't know what to think. I felt bad dropping him off after that happened, but I just told him as he got out of the car, if he needed anything, I would be right there. And I asked him if he wanted me to stay with him, and he said no. He seemed really quiet and just nodded. He went to his house and I left. I wanted to forget all about what we had just seen. My poor friend who literally is sleeping in the house that this thing was looking into. We've maintained friendships over the years, and he said he'd caught that thing looking into his windows a few times after that, and scared him almost to death. He said, other than that though, he's never seen anything like it, and it's never given him any real problems. It's still a night though that I will not forget. My grandfather has a really old barn on his property that he has since left alone and doesn't use anymore. It's still full of hay and all that, but it's out of commission, and since he's had a new barn built on the other side of his property, that suits his functionality needs a little bit more. Now, this older barn has been out of use for, well over 30 years. Even as a kid, I always used to joke and tease with my siblings that the barn was spooky, and none of us wanted to go near it. It gets even scarier because we started hearing noises and banging sounds coming from the top part of the barn, especially at night. They would be so loud we would hear it all the way from the house and wonder if somebody or something was up inside the barn. My grandfather was always quick to dismiss these claims, saying that nobody was on his property and we must just be hearing things. Or it might be birds living up there, if anything. Me and my brothers and sisters used to watch at night at the window, and we swore we saw shadows moving around the barn and outside the barn. One night, me and my little brother and sister decided to get out and check the barn after Grandpa went to bed after 9. We went out there with our flashlights, and as we approached the barn, we didn't hear anything. We opened up the barn, and it stunk like dead cow, or rotting meat or something. I remember it also had this really musky smell that I can't quite place along with the rotting meat. I remember approaching the ladder and hearing a really loud shuffle and bang up above on the 2nd story, and all of us scurried out of there so fast screaming. I stayed out of that barn afterwards. We all did. But at night, I would look out the window and watch the barn, and I would sometimes see this tall figure with what looked to be a dog head and dog ears come in and out of the barn, 2 legs and on 4 legs. It happened so fast that you'd have to watch closely. I told my grandfather there's a large dog living up there, and that we kind of saw and heard it. He really didn't take us seriously. But after that, we went back home with our parents for a while, and didn't come back to his property until the following summer. All of this happened in roughly September, and we ended up going back to his property the following July. When we came back to his property, he had that old barn torn down. We asked him why he did it, and he just basically told us the old barn was causing some problems, and he needed it destroyed to take care of an issue. My grandpa left it at that, and never went any deeper since he's a very stern, no-nonsense type of person. He always has been. I truly believe that was the den, or the living space, of a Dogman. I can't imagine what poor animals saw their last few minutes in that barn as they were eaten and devoured. It's probably where the rotten meat smell came from, but who knows? It still gives me the creeps to think about, and if I had the chance, I would never go back there. I was driving along a desolate road at night, near the Nevada border. I remember I was in Southern Cali at the time, and this happened back in 2005. I was driving along, and out of the side of the road comes this thing that jumps onto the road and stops. It looks like it had an animal in its mouth, and another animal in its hands. It was huge, whatever it was that I saw. It looked like a huge dog with a big hairy body. I thought it was weird because it acted startled, and then it jumped back to the other way across the road. It was very strange, and it was a very strange looking creature. I've never seen any animal in my entire life like it. It kind of looked monkeyish, but at the same time looked kind of like a hyena. I'm not sure really what it was, and it happened so fast, I couldn't really give you really specific details. I wouldn't be surprised if the animals out here live without ever being discovered, since it's so desolate. This happened to me back in 2012 when I was only 17. I had been staying over at a friend's house, just dinking around and hanging out, and I remember it was getting late. I told my friend then it's probably better that I start to head home, and so I left his place. It was a school night, so I realized I should probably be home at a somewhat decent time. Now, my friend lived in an apartment complex about a mile or so away from where I lived. The road I would walk back to my house is pretty lone and desolate. There's actually acres and acres of woods along this road to the right, due to the plot of land never being developed. I walked on this road quite often to go to friends' houses, to walk around, etc. I've never had any issues. Well, except for this night. As I'm leaving my friend's apartment complex, I began to get a strange feeling like I'm being watched. My first instinct is that there's a gangbanger or someone who's going to shank me or rob me, so I start to pick up the pace quite rapidly. As I'm walking down this long stretch of road, next to me across the street is that forested plot land I was telling you about. It was quite a big plot of land too. I think several acres of just undeveloped land, like I said. Acres and acres. It feels like it went on forever. Since it was undeveloped, the brush was extremely thick, and there was a lot of trees. This was springtime. The only things I knew that probably went into this are critters and probably homeless people making homeless camps. I began to hear shuffling and thudding in the woods, keeping parallel with me on the street as I kept my pace. My instincts fired up, and I thought it was a person. But then, as I began to listen closer and closer, I realized the footsteps were extremely heavy. This person would have had to weigh hundreds and hundreds of pounds for it to make any real sense. I began to get so scared, but I knew if I looked over, I would see something I didn't want to see, and so I kept my gaze straight, and I continued on down the street. Keep in mind, it's after 10 p.m. at this point. There's really no cars around since it's a back road, and the only light is the street lights. I make it a little further down the street, and for whatever reason, decide to look over, and looking at me through the trees was the ugliest looking wolf creature thing I've ever seen in my life. It was hideous. All I can remember seeing is these bright glowing red eyes and huge teeth. What scared me the most is it acted like it wanted it to see me and wanted to scare me. It wasn't just checking me out. I feel like it was trying to lure me into the woods, but I would just keep walking away from it. It honestly looked like the perfect definition of a monster, a real life Hollywood monster in the flesh. There's a part where you get to, in the road, and then straight where you can take a road that goes to your left, away from the forest, but it adds an extra mile or so to get back to my house. I wasn't taking any chances this night. I booked it down that road, and I looked behind me to see if this thing would follow suit. and it never did. I ended up getting back home about 30 or so minutes later, since I took the extra long way. But looking back, I don't regret it, and I don't know what was watching me in that forest. I told a couple of my friends, and they believe it was a werewolf. I didn't think werewolves were real, but that's the only way I know how to describe what I saw, other than it being some sort of wolf creature. This thing was tall though. It was staring at me, higher in the tree line. There's no way that was just a regular dog, unless it was given some sort of crazy special serum to grow 10 times the normal size. And why would a dog have glowing red eyes and be staring at me, showing its teeth? I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I've had friends ask me to describe it as closely as I possibly could. Have you ever seen the movie Van Helsing? That is the best werewolf I could possibly think to describe it as. You know, the end fight where he turns into a werewolf and fights the vampire, and he's really scary looking? That werewolf is pretty close to what I saw staring at me. This sighting happened around fall of 2017. I was driving back to Vermont with my parents in the back seat, and we were checking out the beautiful scenic view near Lake Champlain in New York. It was about 1 in the afternoon, and we were driving down Highway 9, which rides right along the lake, and it also drives right by the Ausable Marsh Wildlife Area. This marsh area is rather small, but it's still beautiful to look at over. If you're driving the 9, it's pretty forested with a lot of brush on both sides, with there being a little bit more openness on the western side. More open being more spread out trees, and you can actually see. Now, like I said, my family and I were driving up this highway, headed north. That's when my father in the back seat happened to look over to his left and see these huge dogs running through the woods. He told me, "Hey guys, what on earth is that?" And we all looked over, and there was 4 of them, at least that we could see. They were actually going faster than we were, and all of them were on all 4s. And then they bolted out onto the road and crossed the road. They looked like huge brown and gray wolves. I've never seen a dire wolf before in my life, but I would imagine if they did exist, this is what they would look like. It was a pack, and after they bolted across the road, my parents were both freaking out, saying, "Oh my God, did you see that?" I've never seen those kind of dogs before, etc. They didn't look too strange to me, but I really didn't get a chance to sit there and stare and study them, and really take in all the details. Keep in mind, I'm driving, so what I did see was just 4 or 5 giant wolves running through the woods, and then cross the highway quickly. At no time do they bother to look over at any of the cars or just us. They just keep to their own. I didn't see any teeth, and I didn't see any eye glow or any of that. I don't think it was a Dogman since they were running on all 4s, but I definitely believe they were dire wolves or something because they were much bigger than a regular wolf. Imagine wolves the size of a moose, and you kind of get the picture. Not only us, but a couple of other cars in the oncoming lane slammed on their brakes as these things ran out. We know a few other people saw them as well. I know there's critters out here, but I never knew those existed. This happened to me in my little town in Arkansas near Beech Grove. Me and my mom and dad lived out in the boonies, and we were surrounded by a lot of bog and swamp. I remember being little and hearing screams out in the swamp at night, and always being afraid to go out there. My father has always been hunting and an outdoors kind of guy, and always told me he never heard of that, and there's nothing to be afraid of out there. This screaming and howling, though, went on for nights. I would hear it all throughout the night, almost every single night, and it would keep me up. I would look out my window on the property and not see anything, but just hear screams. I remember one night in particular was really humid, more than usual, and I was having a really tough time falling asleep. I hadn't heard any howls this night, but for whatever reason, something in my gut told me to get up and look out the window. I got up out of bed and approached my window and looked out. At first, I didn't see anything until I turned my head to the left. About 50 to 100 yards away, I see this large black mass with pointy ears and glowing yellow eyes, and what looked to be wobbling in our house's direction. I screamed bloody murder and hid underneath my covers. I must have fallen asleep not too long after that, because at some point, I remember waking up to the sound of tapping on my window and heavy breathing. I was too freaked out to even pull my head out of the covers to see what it was. It was still dark, I remember that. The tapping went on for a little bit, and it kept me awake. At some point, though, the day broke, and I remember waking up to hearing my dad whooping and hollering outside. My dad comes back into the house with his cup of coffee and says one of the neighbors must have gotten a huge dog because it walked through our property last night and left huge prints. My dad is not educated at all when it comes to dogs, so to him, this is just a large dog that had come through our property, and he assumed it was because of the neighbors. This scared me because even though I haven't really watched any werewolf or horror movies at the time, I thought it was a monster coming to get me. The same one that came at me last night, and I realized it wasn't a nightmare. My dad was pretty irritated that it left so many prints in the muck and soil, so he talked with the neighbors, and they don't even have any dogs. He's still, though, convinced that some large dog from one of the neighbors in the area found its way through our property. He wouldn't be wrong, though. I believe it was a large dog. That large dog being a Dogman.